I'd like, first of all, to thank Mr. President of the Parliamentary Assembly of NATO for holding the session of the Assembly here in Tbilisi, for having paid so much attention to Ukraine as well. For Ukraine, accession to NATO remains the strategic guideline of our foreign policy. And currently, the majority of people in Ukraine support this guideline. And now, as the Russian aggression against Ukraine is going on, the number of Ukrainians who support this idea is constantly growing. That is why, for us, it's extremely important to maintain contacts and cooperation primarily within the parliamentary realm. And I'd like to remind you that this year we mark the 20th anniversary since the Charter on Distinctive Partnership between Ukraine and NATO was signed. And on the 3rd of July, I gave an assignment to arrange a special meeting to commemorate that anniversary, and I'm sure that this will be yet another step towards deepening cooperation between us. And today I also said that I addressed the President of the Assembly with the request to hold a Parliamentary Assembly meeting in Kyiv, and this is going to be very symbolic gesture, just like the holding of the assembly here in Tbilisi, because today both Ukraine and Georgia are at the forefront of defense of the free world against the Russian aggression. And it is extremely important, not just for politicians and for Ukrainian citizens, but primarily for the guys at the front line to feel that the whole free world is behind us, that we are backed up by NATO allies who support both Ukraine and Georgia in the fight for their freedom and independence. I do hope that members of the Parliamentary Assembly of NATO will consider our request, and hopefully in October during the next session we will have a positive decision as regards holding Parliamentary Assembly meeting in Ukraine, in Kyiv. And I can reassure Mr. President that Ukraine will do its very utmost to make sure that our military is aligned with NATO standards, and we will do everything possible to make sure that Ukraine, just like Georgia, do become members of the alliance.
Thank you. It is very important that Chairman Mr. PARUBIY is here today. As you know, it is not usual that we have a session in a non-NATO member country. It is only the 5th time in the story of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, 60 years, and it is the first time since 15 years. And having here the chairman of the Ukrainian Parliament is a great symbolic meaning, because NATO Parliamentary Assembly has a particular relationship with two countries, Georgia and Ukraine. We have special committees with Georgia and Ukraine. Georgia and Ukraine are facing similar threats, have been subject to illegal occupation of territories, and NATO Parliamentary Assembly strongly condemns that and supports territorial integrity both of Georgia and Ukraine. I was in Kiev in April. I met Chairman PARUBIY and President Poroshenko, and I reaffirmed our strong support to Ukraine territorial integrity, and also to the aspiration to be member of the Euro-Atlantic community. The same happens here in Tbilisi. Today we have approved a very important resolution which is great support to Georgia's aspiration to Euro-Atlantic integration. So We will be again in Kiev in July with the Parliamentary Assembly for an important seminar. We will have the chance to discuss about these issues, to see how the tensions are going with the Russian Federation, and that will also be a very symbolic event because it will be connected also to the celebration of the 25th anniversary of the NATO Ukraine Charter. So we have many symbols, and symbols are important for reality because they mean that we are moving in the same direction. And again, I have to thank Chairman President PARUBIY for coming here in Tbilisi and addressing our assembly. And again, once again, I say that we are strongly supporting independence, territorial integrity, and Euro-Atlantic aspiration, both of Ukraine and Georgia. I don't hear this. The message for the Georgian people is exactly that NATO and NATO Parliamentary Assembly are close to Georgia. Yesterday I visited the occupied territories, the boundary, the administrative boundary line. I had the chance to see with my eyes what happens there. As in the past, I had the chance to visit Donbas. And I have to tell you that what I saw in Donbas and what I heard from the population in Donbas, I can never forget in my life. So it's important that we see with our eyes, we speak, we understand what is happening here and in Ukraine as well. And my message to Georgian people is we go on and we support the aspiration of NATO membership and European membership. It will take some time, but we already have in place all the instruments for that. And we also observed the great improvements which Georgia has made in the last years regarding democracy, regarding strengthening the institutions, regarding increasing the economic situation, improving the economic situation in the country. So everything is going in the right direction. We know that it takes time. It also took time for other countries which have come to NATO in the last years. You cannot, it is not immediate, but the road is that, and I can reassure that we go together on the same way.
Can I ask? Good morning, Marta Ardashelia. My question is to both of you. How should Georgia and Ukraine should overcome the main obstacle to this way, to the NATO, I mean Russia, politically and technically? Thank you.
Well, the situation with Ukraine is not very different from Georgia. Ukraine has also Euro-Atlantic aspirations. Ukraine is also working to modernize the political system, the institutional system. Of course, every country has particular problems or particular objectives to reach. So I will not say details because it's impossible to go in details, but we observe a continuous improvement of the situation. Unfortunately, regarding Ukraine, we have an international agreement, which is the Minsk agreements, which is not fulfilled by the Russian part. We don't see any real intention from the Russian Federation to fulfill those agreements. And so we have, the international community has to take into account this big problem. But I want to mention what Chairman Parubiy said before when he addressed the Assembly that we need a political solution. And we work on that, and NATO Parliamentary Assembly, being made of parliamentarians of all the countries of NATO, plus many other partner countries, is an essential tool for parliamentary diplomacy and for supporting the government. So we return to our homes now from Georgia, strongly convinced that we have to work on our national parliaments and on our national governments to build a common view that a political solution is needed for Ukraine and for Georgia as well.
Дякую вам за запитання. Справді.
Thank you very much for the question. True, for the Russian Federation, it's absolutely crucial to prevent both Georgia and Ukraine from joining NATO. And they don't even hide that. This is the main irritant for them, that Georgia and Ukraine chose NATO as the main guideline for their foreign policy. But the key aspect of life of the free world lies in the principle that no country has a right of veto on the foreign policy of any other country, and Russia will never have the right of veto on the wish of either Georgia or Ukraine to join NATO. Russians cannot reconcile with this idea, but we have paid too dearly for our freedom and for our right to decide what structures and what alliances we are going to join, be it Ukraine or Georgia. Ukraine and Georgia have made their choice. I understand that this may take a lot of time, but we have NATO decision saying that Ukraine will be a member of NATO, and Ukraine, just like Georgia, is firmly on this track. In Ukraine, a lot of large-scale reforms are underway, both in economic and human rights spheres, but also in the security-related sphere. By 2020, we are planning to align our security sector with NATO standards, and we will do everything possible to make this happen as soon as possible. And I'm sure that the free world and NATO countries will not allow Russia to have a veto on our decision.
That I fully agree with Mr. Parubiy's statement. We see a lot of popular support to NATO and European integration, both in Georgia and in Ukraine, and nobody can discuss the self-determination principle of people. If Mr. Putin says that calls for self-determination of the peoples to justify the illegal annexation of Crimea, he must recognize that Georgian people and Ukrainian people must be free to go where they like. And the Russian narrative that NATO expanded towards Russia is not true, because there was no action by NATO to expand. There was a free decision from many countries which were part of the former Soviet Union to go to the West for their decision. Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, Bulgaria, some parts of the Western Balkans. Those people freely decided to come, and they succeeded. This will happen also for Ukraine and Georgia.
Андрей Владимирович, у меня будет вопрос к вам. Намерена ли Украина ввести безвизовый режим с Россией, и если планирует, то как?
Mr. Parubiy, question to you, whether Ukraine is going to introduce visa regime with Russia, when it may happen. Unfortunately, the Russian propaganda machine has played its role in aggression against Ukraine, which was not less crucial than clandestine sabotage groups. That's why I will not answer the questions posed by the representative of Russian mass media. Tell us, please, what directions of possible cooperation between NATO and Organization of Collective Security Treaty. And a question to Mr. PARUBIY. How would you comment the attention which was paid at the current North Atlantic Alliance summit, the attention to the Arctic and Black Sea regions? I'm representing the Eurasia publication, independent publication. The next question, please.
Я хочу подякувати.
I would like to thank the journalists, especially I would like to thank all the Parliamentary Assembly members for the support which Ukraine receives practically at every session, and Ukraine remains in the agenda of NATO PA in spite of Russia doing everything possible to delete Ukraine from the international agenda. And as it was, I mentioned today, the NATO Parliamentary Assembly visited Ukraine during Maidan events, and now NATO PA is a very reliable partner of Ukraine. And for us, it's a great honor that currently the Parliamentary Assembly is led by the president, who is a big friend of Ukraine, big champion of Ukraine, who has visited our country many times. And I am pretty sure that under your leadership, our cooperation will be even more effective. Thank you.